paragraphs 7 and 8 of the Code of Virginia 1950, as amended for legal matters. Consultation with legal counsel and briefings by staff members or consultants pertaining to actual or probable litigation, where such consultation or briefing in open meeting would be adversely affect the negotiating or litigating posture of the public body pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A7, and consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, Section 2.2-3711A8, namely to discuss pending and probable litigation regarding the school board and school division, namely to discuss settlement offers in 2 pending cases, status of pending litigation, recent settlements of lawsuits against the school division, and direction to legal counsel on how to proceed with a legal matter. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Okay, we are ready to go closed. that magnet the other day,
Yeah.
but does it hold up well?
Yeah, it's not a magnet. It's a sticky.
Oh, I have one in my car. There's a magnet on the dash, and you can swivel it.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So
That's what I
this,
thought that was.
so
No, that's
this
just a
just
holder.
allows me to hold it like this, so I don't have to. I walk around with it like this now.
I have one.
Or I'll hold it like this.
But in the
I wish
car,
I
if
had
you,
gone just a little bit higher, but it doesn't matter.
yeah, I could have put mine up a little higher because my phone is heavy, and I noticed that. But if you're trying to follow directions, it's great
Yeah.
because you can swivel it.
Yes.
That
To
way.
look right.
I
Okay.
assume we've got at least 2 minutes.
We got
It'll
2
take that
minutes.
long
You
to
got
get
2
there.
minutes. Go. So what do we have? Well, we having everybody come in. colleagues to please silence all electronic devices at this time. A couple of quick administrative matters. Just a reminder that we do have a spring regional meeting in Suffolk on April 8th. So if you haven't signed up for that and you want to, you need to let Diane know. I sent out an explanation earlier this afternoon on email on about my meeting with the mayor yesterday and how it affected the resolution for this evening. So how many of you saw that? You didn't see it this afternoon?
I saw the updated resolution, but I didn't see an email from about
I sort of I piggybacked on top of that, so you probably saw the new resolution.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
And then I just piggybacked on top of that. So
I got the resolution from SharePoint. I never got an email from you on it.
Ms. Alexander sent out an email this afternoon with a revised resolution
Yeah,
with
I got
new
that.
wording. Okay.
At 11:31, right?
I got one at like 3.
Anyway, so the reason for that was because I had an appointment with the mayor yesterday at I believe it was for 2:30. And originally, when I first scheduled the meeting, it was just with me. It was just me alone, and I thought it was going to be just the mayor and I. Okay. Then in talking with Dan, I think we were together for something else, and so I mentioned that I had a meeting, and realizing that Mr. Edwards is really good friends with the mayor. They have a very close relationship. They have breakfast together occasionally even. And so anyway, so I thought, okay, there's no reason why I couldn't ask Mr. Edwards to accompany me. Plus the fact that, and this is the biggest factor, I knew that we would be talking a little bit about the funding formula and the wording that's in there, and Mr. Edwards was chair when the funding formula was developed. So I know he's very familiar with how that works and why we have to use the language that we use when we ask for additional funding. So so I asked him to accompany me, and after I got there, I was really happy that I had asked him to accompany me, because not that 2 against 1 is not, and it wasn't adversarial at all. It's just that when I got there, the vice mayor was there as well. And so I was really glad that I had Mr. Edwards with me. And so together we talked with the mayor, and so in our conversation, we brought up that we were planning to have a resolution this evening that we would be talking about more money for full-day kindergarten. And so in the conversation, it was suggested that we, since we have to use that wording as part of our formula agreement, that possibly we could say something to the effect of we need additional funding, and we realize that City Council might be able to find. Mr. Edwards, can you help me out with this wording a little bit?
We talked about initially what was in the wording that we had previous in terms of the 0.85 or something of a. They said, don't go down that road. I mean, there is no need to quantify in terms of that, because they don't even know that ours will be in it. They said they would certainly entertain the consideration of the additional funding, and if it was done, it might be done in conjunction with some sort of an adjustment that they might be making otherwise. But they did not. They specifically said, we do not need you to tell us, a suggested adjustment to the tax rate.
So that's how we came about the new wording.
The wording that's in the new resolution is compliant with the funding formula. In the past, we have, but it's not required.
Right. So the actual words, I think, that were put in there was that they would use a tax hike if and only if they cannot find the money elsewhere. Okay. And I was pretty happy about hearing that, because in Virginia, school boards don't have taxing authority. Yet we have to use that language whenever we ask for additional funding, and so I like the fact that they said, go ahead and put that in there as well. Ms. Manning.
Well, no matter what we put in the resolution, it's still in our revenue sharing formula that when we're asking for additional funds, it's with the understanding that we're supporting it through a tax increase. So no matter what we put in the resolution, if this is voted for, we're supporting city council asking for a tax increase.
If they can't find additional funds
Yeah, that's-
within their
Based on a
budget.
Yes,
revenue
what you say
sharing
is
formula
what
agreement.
you say is true.
Thank you.
That's true. It is true. Ms. Weems?
Yeah, I was just gonna say the same thing. I agree with Ms. Manning, we all agree. And then also it just says here, further resolve that the school board supports an increase in the real estate tax. Or any other local
Oh,
tax. for
I'm
the
sorry.
revenue streams with-
I actually have a copy of the
So-
resolution as it was revised. I'm so sorry.
It smells
Should have
like
passed that out
ash.
before I even started talking about it.
So I think we know what it means.
I know, but it's
No,
nice
I
to
mean,
have
I got
the
public
copies
What
on
the
hand.
request means.
So sorry. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to bring to your attention was, part of our agenda this evening. We have, the Compass to 2020, charting the course, and these were the, adjustments that were made for the schools, you know, for their, improvement plans. So, there are those. And then the only other thing I wanted to bring up was yesterday, I was here a lot yesterday, and so there were little things that were coming up here and there. So in the part of the conversation, somebody mentioned something about, a possible retreat this summer, and I realized that we have an ad hoc committee, and then that's their job, is to plan the retreat, pick the dates of the retreat, but in lieu of the fact that, people have to make plans. So in conferring with Dr. Spence's schedule, I'd like to ask if there is consensus to direct the retreat ad hoc committee to establish July 8th and 9th as the dates for the school board's retreat, so that everybody, including staff, can lock their calendars and we can do the same. And if so, we'll add an adjustment to our already approved schedule of meetings to our March 26th consent agenda, because the 8th is a Monday and the 9th is a Tuesday, and we can't have it on a Wednesday because Dr. Spencer's out of town on that Wednesday, the 10th. So we were looking at July 8th and 9th as a possible time that we could lock down for.
Probably worth pointing out that the 9th is already a scheduled board meeting.
Correct,
So
right.
that's a scheduled day.
And the reason we're asking for 2 days is because, as you know, we did not have a retreat in January. We have a lot of items that need to be discussed in depth. And so it may not be that we need a full day on the 9th. We might be able to start just a little early, half a day, I'm not sure. But I thought if we could go at least, if we could lock down those 2 dates, that would be good now. Ms.
So
Manning.
has the ad hoc committee met?
We passed this to the ad hoc committee, and as far as I know, the ad hoc committee was compliant with this particular thing. They have to meet and talk about other things that they want to see as part of the retreat. But all I'm asking for now is to be able to lock down these 2 days,
I'm sorry, did you say July 8th and 9th?
8th and 9th, July 8th and 9th.
And just for the record, we had a request to wait until after the budget, until we were finished with the budget, to start meeting for this committee.
So is there any objection to that? Okay, that way everybody can lock their calendars, and including staff and everybody. And that's actually all trying to see if there's anything else that I have to talk about. We're not going to have to adjust our agenda, I don't think, at this point. So I think that's all. So, Dr. Spence? Or actually,
Actually,
Mr.
I think
Edwards
first on
is
our-
who's next on the agenda.
I think I'll sit here.
No,
Is that okay?
come
Want me-
on, David.
You want me up there?
Yeah,
Okay.
let's do it the
Why
right
not?
way.
Just,
Come on.
just don't look for there are no slides.
We want to be able to critique
mostly
you.
because I probably couldn't have figured out how to make it move for some of the other people. I have the honor of, on your behalf, colleagues, chairing the Achievable Dreams task force that was established last May. We have, in the last, 8-9 months, met 6 times. It does not sound like a very aggressive schedule for a committee to proceed, but we have, when we have met, we have tasked the staff to go back and do a lot of development in terms of options, and I'm talking about enrollment, an enrollment area, facilities. We've run through as many as probably 7 or 8 facility options. Back to our basic mission. We had a couple issues that drove the creation of it. The MOU under which the elementary program ran was expiring. The MOU did not address secondary, and we're already into year 1 of secondary achievement dreams. And there were clear facility issues and requirements to make the secondary portion of Achievable Dreams functional and able to move forward. The committee was set up with heavy stakeholder involvement from the CTAC community, the Achievable Dreams school community, the Achievable Dreams board, the Achievable Dreams staff, 3 members of your school board, as well as the chair has sat in on most of the meetings, and we had a representative from the city council. So we've had, as you know, I don't know that we had significant input and the ability, and that's why when we did meet, there was typically a lot of we need this, we need that, and anyway, as we the purpose of this brief is, first of all, it's going to be very short and very limited in terms of detail, because frankly, the committee is meeting again in 10 days, and at that time we will hopefully be locking in, and you will see me or a staff rep up here presenting specific items that will require us to develop consensus or potentially even vote on, depending on their nature. The enrollment at Achievable Dreams has been marginal. In other words, the initial goals that were set in the MOU when the program was launched, they have struggled within the initial time period, because frankly, when that MOU was written, they did not know what they did not know the market well enough down here. Our staff did not know, their staff did not know, obviously everybody I just talked about. So and clearly we have to make sure that the program we are jointly producing, and this is a public-private production. The Achievable Dreams board raises north of $2 million a year to put into the program to fund the enhancements above the core basic elementary Title I instructional processes that we provide. And so we needed to make sure that it continues to be a viable program. I know that most, and maybe all of our board members have been there to tour. And it's what you see, and many of us have been there many times, is pretty impressive. And obviously our staff monitors the instructional process and the academic achievement, and that's a yardstick that the committee has looked at. The So as we stand here today, there are multiple options for the secondary facility. We have informally, since the last meeting, there have been some additional options that have not even been seen by the committee. But I think we are very close to an easy number one recommendation out of the committee at the next meeting. The targeted enrollment. We are looking at recommending an expansion of the recruitment area, the enrollment area for Achievable Dreams, to which is basically limited right now to the Lynn Haven Middle attendance zone. We're looking at adding the 3 adjacent middle school attendance zones to do that, to provide an opportunity to the children in these surrounding areas for the program. As we've looked at enrollment and issues and where the program was would the students in our city would best be served by this, we've had all kinds of inputs, including legal, limitation of some of our options based on anticipated legal challenges, depending on which way we went, specifically in terms of targeting within the city versus going citywide. But expansion on a concentric basis has 2 advantages. One, it's likely not to have a legal challenge, but more importantly, it will also obviously minimize any expansion of our transportation costs by addressing and offering the program to those that are in the adjacent enrollment areas. As they say, I expect either at our meeting on the 26th or our first meeting in April to have a real presentation with slides and data and things. Because of we frankly got other items on the agenda tonight, I would suggest, and hopefully you'll all agree, if you have questions on what I have just discussed, I would be more than happy to sit down with you individually, to talk about it on the phone, or meet with you individually. But as I say, there's not a lot of data to dump on the table tonight, but we will be there in just a few weeks, and likely have the professionals that are sitting behind you up there, hopefully up there, particularly with Tony and the facility options and some of the other. So unless somebody's got a question that they have to answer now, I'd suggest we go ahead and kind of table this presentation until we can resume it with that type of presentation. Is that agreeable with everybody?
Nope. Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards.
So we're going to move into presentation on school start times. This is essentially updating you on our plan for gathering community feedback and the options that we intend to present. We have about 20 minutes based on the board's preference for a halt at 5:30. If we need to, if there are more questions than that, we obviously could come back after, or we can continue at your preference. But Mr. Keever, you're up.
He always has the folders.
I know,
I do.
but no colored ones this time.
However, the presentation animation graphics are not working similar to what Mr. Edwards was sharing. So I feel badly that there won't be more entertainment in the conversation.
You know why he did Manila?
Reach a
Because
level of
last time everybody
entertainment.
fought over the colors.
I know.
That's yours, right?
Yeah, I guess you didn't want us to fight over the colors, huh?
I did not. Yeah, I figured we would just go solid color for everybody.
These are from the last time.
All right. Okay.
Does everybody have a copy? So in your folder this evening, you have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that we'll review, and you also have a one-page slide which details our current start times for the school division. So I want to make sure that's also in the presentation, but you may want to compare that as we get into some of the different options, so I wanted you to have that. Good evening, Chairwoman Anderson, Vice Chair Melnick, school board members. During our workshop this evening, and based on direction from the school board by way of unanimous resolution in November of 2018, we intend to provide an opportunity for the board to review options related to our shift of start times for the 2021 school year and describe how we will gather feedback from the larger community on those options for making the shift in our times. As we get started with the presentation this evening, I wanted to give a special thanks to our operations team, Jack Freeman, Executive Director for Transportation, David Pace, Director Sean Barnes, Area Supervisor Charles Chuck Blair, for their incredible work over the last couple months in researching the options that had previously been provided to us by school bus consultants. Also, as we get started this evening, I wanted to mention the work from Media and Communications, Natalie Allen and Lauren Velasco. Lauren and the web team have helped develop and build out an informative start times link on our website, and that gives the community some information on the research, the relative research with respect to start times, in addition to some of the key presentations that we've made during the course of the process. I would hope that you take some time and look at that information and also help direct members of our community to that site. It is off of the school hours site on our webpage. This evening I want to just give some brief reminders of where we have been to this point. Want to share again 3 or 4 of the key data items from 2017, provide for you the 4 options under consideration, and review our plan to gather community feedback on those options. You have seen this graphic a number of different times, yet I still think it is important to remind not only the group here this evening, but also anybody that may be joining us on the web, that the stage for this conversation really began in July of 2015 when the school board asked Dr. Spence and administration to look at the topic of start times. Over the course of the last several years, there have been different work products that have been provided to the board, to include a study by school bus consultants, to include a literature review from one of our partners, Hanover Research. There was dialogue during the spring of 2017 about needing community feedback on start times. We did a community survey. Those results were provided to the board in June of 2017. July of 2017, during the school board retreat, we had further discussion about the data. At that time, the board requested that administration develop a plan to help light athletic fields at the high school level, specifically baseball and softball. And it was during a 2018 school board workshop on the plan to use reversion dollars, there was a request to revisit the start time dialogue and consider next steps prior to the allocation of those reversion resources. In November of 2018, the school board unanimously approved a resolution directing the superintendent to develop start time options allowing adolescent students to start school later. Nearly 8,000 parents and just over 3,000 staff members completed our survey. Combining that with the student voice, nearly 32,000 folks gave us feedback on start times. As mentioned in previous workshops, determining parent and student agreement levels with the concept of being satisfied with our current start times was an important component of our surveying. 36% of responding parents agreed or strongly agreed with the concept of being satisfied with our start times. That was 36 agreed with being satisfied. The agreement level decreases from 39% of elementary school parents to 31% of high school parents. It is during this slide that I will typically remind you that we did not ask our staff the same question on that survey, but we did ask our staff if the times in their schools changed, did they intend to remain in their school? And nearly 88% of staff indicated that they would remain in their school if the times changed. We gathered stakeholder perceptions around medical research on adolescent sleep and school start times with respect to benefits for young people. This slide details that on the parent survey, 78% overall strongly agreed that the idea of a later start time had benefit to health, safety, and well-being of our adolescents. You'll probably also recall this slide. This slide gave us some data around different groups' perspectives and preferences when it came to preferred start times. You'll note that parents and staff had health and sleep as a number one factor. That was the number two factor for students. Academic performance was the number two factor for our parents and staff, and the number one factor for our students. Additionally, I think it's important to remind the group that 71% of our parents agreed or strongly agreed with the idea and supporting an effort by Virginia Beach City Public Schools to develop a schedule that allows for later start times for adolescents. We shared this slide with you in November during, I think, the final school board presentation in advance of the resolution. I want to let you know that administration has worked with various groups within departments to help build out the options and look specifically at the options that you'll see this evening. We will continue with a community feedback plan that I will detail momentarily. Our goal is to come back to you in July. It sounds like on the 8th or the 9th of July in a retreat fashion to have further discussion around a particular recommendation, and then move forward at the board's direction with an implementation of a communication plan next school year to then implement this change in the fall of 2020. So at this time I want to direct you to our current start times. And that is the slide in the deck, and that's the slide you have in front of you as well. High schools begin at 7:20 with a 2:10 dismissal. Elementary A's are 8:10 to 2:40. Elementary B's are 8:40 to 3:10. And middle schools are 9:30 to 4. What I'm about to preview for you are 4 options that are under the strongest consideration from administration with respect to feasibility. The options are in no particular order. We have lettered them A, B, C, and D as a result of being able to help foster dialogue around the different options as you talk about it and as we share with the community. As we begin this discussion, please know that every single one of the options that we're presenting to you this evening will require a shift and change in thinking from our school community. And that's because we are moving forward based on the resolution with the idea of adolescent students starting later. So each one of these comes with some strengths, and each one of these comes with some challenges. Option A would have elementary school A's starting at 7:30 with a 2 o'clock dismissal. Elementary B's at 8 a.m. with a 2:30 dismissal. Middle schools beginning at approximately 8:45 with a 3:15 dismissal. And then high school starting at 9:25 with a 4:15 dismissal. You will note some strengths on the left-hand side of the slide and some challenges on the right-hand side of the slide. One of the things that I'll note that is not in the slide presentation this evening is that there has been discussion administratively around the idea of really looking carefully at elementary A schools and elementary B schools and likely shifting who goes in which group based on some efficiencies with transportation. So when you see option A this evening and see option B, recognize that we'll also be having some dialogue around who ought to be in an elementary A and who ought to be in elementary B as a way of transportation efficiencies.
Okay.
So this is option A.
Can I ask a quick question? Okay, right here, all adolescent students would have start times of 8 a.m. or later.
Correct.
Middle and high school.
Yeah, wouldn't it? Well, it's actually 8:45 or later.
Yeah.
True, but so we could have put 8:30. We could have put 8:45.
Oh, okay.
Right.
We set, as you'll see in some of the later options, we set as a baseline
Oh,
8
no, it's a
a.m.
base. Okay, because I think,
Right.
8:45 is a lot later than 8.
Right.
Right.
Okay,
There could have been any time that we added in there after 8 o'clock.
okay.
There were options
see,
that
that's a
didn't
baseline.
get
I
them,
see.
but that's
Yeah,
sort
I
of
didn't-
baseline
okay,
for us. So
okay.
we didn't want to present options that didn't get them to start later,
Okay.
earlier than 8 a.m. based on your resolution.
And I'm willing to go to option B and C and D and then come back and address questions if you'd like to take them that way.
Sure.
I also
Right.
think it's really important
I think
for
that's
you
important.
folks to give us some feedback on the community feedback plan because we want to make sure that we are getting the right information from our constituents. So this is option A. Option B is elementary A school starting at 7:45 with a 2:15 dismissal, elementary B at 8:15 with a 2:45 dismissal, middle schools at 9 a.m. with a 3:30 dismissal, and high schools at 9:40 with a 4:30 dismissal.
Wow.
Again, strengths and challenges for this plan, or this option, excuse me, are provided on the slide. One of the things that we discussed at length in some of our committee meetings was this idea of what time would be the earliest an elementary school student would need to arrive at a bus stop. You might have noticed on the previous slide in option A, there, approximately 2,500 elementary school students would need to be moving towards the bus between 6:45 and 7. With this particular option, transportation feels like most, if not all, elementary students will be picked up after 7 o'clock a.m. I think that's an important distinction to make. Option C, move the middle school group to the first tier, and that would be 7:30 to 2 o'clock. Elementary A at 8:05 to 2:35, elementary B from 8:40 to 3:10, high schools from elementary B from 8:40 to 3:10, and then high schools from 9:20 to 4:10. You'll note under the strengths here that adolescents in high schools would have start times after 8 a.m. The adolescents in middle school would start prior to 8 a.m. Again, a strength and challenge within the same option. One of the other components that needs to be considered and talked about, or at least brought to light, is the idea around transportation to some of our middle school athletic programs and then ODS participation. Option D is the option that moved everybody 40 minutes later. So high schools would start at 8 a.m., dismiss at 2:50, elementary A at 8:50 to 3:20, elementary B from 9:20 to 3:50, and middle schools from 10:10 a.m. to 4:40 p.m. Again, strengths and challenges for option D are provided on the slide for your consideration. Let me move to the community feedback piece, and then I'd be happy to maybe come back, and if you want to ask some questions about the options, or if you prefer not to, that's okay as well. But Mr. Pace is here to help me if we start going too far into people transportation stops. Our community feedback plan. Again, we would be asking the community for their feedback around the 4 options. Based on the resolution, we do not intend to ask the community, should we change start times? We've already asked that question. We would ask the question, of these 4 options, which can you support the most, or which do you feel least strongly about? We would try to get some demographic information from parents via the e-town hall with respect to what grade levels are their students in. And so we would have that e-town hall available coming out of spring break for about 2.5 weeks, from the 22nd of April through May 10th. There are a number of different groups that you can see that we will meet with specifically to get feedback from. One of the groups that you don't see on here that we would look to also include would be engaging some of our child care providers in a discussion about the options. That date has not been established, but it's something that we would look to do as a way to draw in the community to that discussion. We would also hold 3 community forums. We tried to place those geographically across the city. We tried to look at an elementary school, middle school, and high school to give opportunities for folks to join us, hear an overview of what the different options are, and gather their feedback around those options. We would pledge to come back to the board in late May with the data from the community feedback in a fashion that we hope would arm you for a discussion at your July retreat. So at this point, do you have feedback on the feedback plan? And then do you wish to talk options?
Ms. Manning, Ms. Melnick, and then we'll get Ms. Manning in it.
Unless Mrs. Manning, you have a question about the feedback.
No, I just want a question about the option.
So, option A, why did you why,
I'm gonna ask Mr. Case to come on down so that he doesn't get to go back and forth to the mic. But go ahead.
okay, why didn't you choose high schools to start at 8:45 and middle schools to start at 9:25?
If memory serves, that was one of the scenarios where, based on the middle school transportation system as well as the high school transportation system, we simply don't have the transportation fleet support to be able to do that. Our peak times are such that we need a gap between, or a little bit more of a gap between middle and high. And we projected somewhere in the neighborhood of 110 additional buses needed in that tiering structure.
And you also got to remember the high school instructional day is 20 minutes longer than all the rest of the schools. So by necessity, that would put the middle schools dismissing at least 20 minutes later than it will the high schools.
So,
High schools are 6 hours and 50 minutes, whereas all the others are 6 hours and 30 minutes.
all of the high schools, I'm all for, we're going to change the times, but the high schools are so late. And so then I think about sports. And so you're talking, just pick 4:15, and then you're talking about travel time on a bus. And some of those are in Chesapeake. So you're looking, just for baseball, you're looking at, because you're looking at a start time of 6:30 on a school night instead of a 4 o'clock start time, which is what they're doing right now. So
Baseball,
soccer,
football,
right.
field hockey.
Couple things that it wasn't necessarily, I guess it wasn't necessarily a question, it was more of a statement, but let me speak to a couple of the scheduling pieces. For instance, we have projected that if it's a 4:15 dismissal, you likely could start a contest at 6 p.m. if not prior to that. So 6 p.m. would be a target time potentially for baseball and softball. Currently, when some of our schools visit other locales that do have lights and do have a later start time, they have later starts as it is. So not all of our athletic programs start right at 4 o'clock. So there would be some shifts and some movement in terms of scheduling times.
Right, like in Chesapeake, they go to 3:43 and 3:38.
Right.
So, okay, I don't want to hog it. I'll come back to myself. Go ahead.
Okay, Ms. Manning.
I don't have the original bus transportation plan that we looked at a while ago. Specifically for option A, I don't recall us needing 27 buses originally. Did that change?
Yes, ma'am.
And it was also, they projected somewhere in the neighborhood of 17 to 18. And when we looked at it, we feel like it's closer to 27.
I'll just be upfront. I wasn't here when the study was done, but I've studied it very closely since that time, and there's a lot of flawed conclusions by the consultant.
Okay.
How they
We should have
interpreted
just
the
had you
data.
consulted.
They interpreted the data of when you make a deployment schedule, you got to make sure that when your bus is deployed, whether it's being used for one service or is it being used for two services. For example, if I've got a high school academy run that's deployed at the A school time, but it has to go into the B school time, then that's one bus for for two services, because now it came to an A school. They didn't consider that. They just took all the numbers pure and said that's the number of buses you would need to be deployed. And that was an incorrect use of that particular data.
Okay.
One of the things that David has shared in his conversations with Sean and Chuck Blair is that, and Sean Barnes, excuse me, as we really hone in and lock in on the option, and they start to rebuild the system around that option, there are potentially efficiencies that we don't currently see as a scenario. So I think that we're projecting worst case scenario that 27 is the number.
Okay. I personally would like to have a dollar figure to put out there with the survey on each of these options. Is that possible? An estimated, I know
Yes.
Pretty hard to-
Mostly
So we,
buses, right?
yeah, I mean, and it's not complicated. It's about $90,000 per bus, and then about $30,000 per driver run. So we can add those numbers up and put them out.
Okay, great. And then my last question, in other school districts, I would assume that if, let's say we went with option A, that, or B, or C, with the high schools starting so much later, do they typically have practices, like practices for sports or club activities before school, say starting at 8? Would that be an option?
So I can speak to my experiences in other counties and other cities. Yes. So we, in those scenarios where you had a much later high school start time, which is what we had in Enrico, we ran JV practices in the morning and varsity practices after school.
Thank you.
Can I just go back and make sure I understand what you're asking for on the feedback piece? So as we share with the community, and so one of the things that we're going to do with the E-Town Hall is have a narrated presentation that goes to the E-Town Hall. Now we can't require them to watch it, but we want to make sure they have the information. You want a dollar amount attached to option A.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's very important.
Okay.
Well, and I would also, for option D, there is a dollar requirement because it says all middle school fields would require lighting.
Correct.
So there's money involved there too.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but
I'm
would that
sorry.
be more than what, 27 buses times 30 bus drivers
Well,
would
there's
be?
a lot of middle
We'll-
schools that don't
we'll
have
figure it
lighting.
No, I'm just asking what the difference
Right.
would be.
We'll
Right.
put the cost with it.
I got you.
Gotcha. Ms. Weems,
Yeah, I was just gonna request a dollar amount for the lights and the buses and the drivers as well. And, yeah, that 10-10 start in option D, is it middle school starting at 10-10? We could really shake everybody's world and just have games before school starts.
Oh,
Eight
Go ahead
o'clock
and have
games.
practice, go ahead and have 7 o'clock games.
Carolyn Weems.
I'm just teasing.
Pretty lots of things.
That's really late.
Mr. Edwards.
The vote in July is troublesome to me.
To the summer.
Well,
Yeah.
so just to be clear about the timeline, we're going to present it to you in July. We weren't
Right.
anticipating that you would take action until the fall.
Okay, well, I didn't say that, nobody is mentally engaged in the education process except for the school board, and it's only 2 days over the summer at a retreat. And it's a huge thing, and even though obviously the community will be engaged on steroids here for the next 2 or 3 months, come July, they're not, and if we can functionally vote in late September, that's a whole lot better than
So I
any
think
kind
it's
of.
just the grammar of the statement in there, but it
Okay.
says approved the revised
Okay.
in September of 2020. We would see it then.
All right.
We,
Yeah, it says
we just
approved.
want to give you,
And we
What-
should have it, and we can get it out there as school starts, saying, hey, okay, thanks.
My name's Nikki.
Yes.
How many high school students, and I know you don't have this information right now, but can you come back sometime in the near future with how many high school students get out early, on early release?
I could.
And I think that's probably more juniors or seniors that get to do that. I don't think they allow early release, I don't think, for freshmen and sophomores, but I think juniors and seniors do get that option, some of them, especially if they have jobs. So I just wanted to ask for that because
we can do
that is one of the things that people say is a negative. What if the kids that have to have jobs, kids, this, that, and the other. So I just like to know that. And also, I think I asked this a while ago, for the money for the lighting for middle schools. I didn't even think about that, but there's a lot of middle schools that don't have lighting, so there's a lot of money required in that as well. So that's it for me. Ms.
Miss-
Melnick? Oh, sorry.
Is it okay to bring you the early release information with the data results on May 28th, or are you asking
No,
for
that's
that?
fine.
Okay.
So Chesapeake has the latest start times right now, and they're in the second group of governor school. So how would this affect the regional? If we started almost an hour later than Chesapeake schools, and they're in group 2, how will we fit in with governor school?
And you also want to remember that Norfolk has just voted to change their high school start time. So frankly, it's going to be a reconfiguration of the governor's school schedule.
That's right. So when I met with Dr. Warren in December to talk about this, she was already looking at how they were going to reconfigure their schedule as a result of our decision. Norfolk was moving in that direction. You know, we have the most students that attend.
Right.
So they're working within their community to come up with a scenario that makes it workable for everybody.
Okay.
Did Norfolk
Norfolk's
have
just
a time?
They don't have a
What is
time
their
yet,
time?
right?
They just voted to do it.
To do it.
They're working on the time.
Yeah, I don't remember.
Okay, all right,
Okay, thank you.
all right. Ms. Rye?
Excuse me. So, I'm trying to remember, I know from that retreat and the consultant review that there was very tentative leaning from the group at the time to flipping elementary and high school, but now I'm wondering is there a reason why high school always comes after middle school in these scenarios, except for C?
I think one of the pieces goes back to what
Well,
Mr.
A and B specifically.
One of the things that Mr. Pace shared with respect to the timing of the school day.
It's longer.
The high school day is a longer instructional day. And so if it goes before and there's not another tier or two, so for instance our schedule now, it doesn't necessarily have an impact because you've got elementary A and elementary B before middle school. But if you do high school before middle school directly and no other tier in there, because of the elongated high school schedule, you have a transportation scenario with the number of buses needed to be able to handle it.
Makes sense.
I'm trying to follow that. I mean, there's a dismissal time, whatever it is. So what's the difference?
If the high school's dismissed, and we looked at the A, B, high school, middle school option very closely, and it would require 100+ more buses because of the academy program. Right now, the high schools being first and middle schools being last allows us to use a lot of those academy buses for some of the other tier services, because some of those routes are an hour and 20 minutes long. If they are in the middle, if they're in the third position in the afternoon, some of those buses, we wouldn't have enough buses to pick up the middle school students when they dismiss, unless we buy 100, 125 more buses.
Okay,
So for instance,
I think I'm
and one of the
screaming
things
at it.
okay.
but one of the things that Mr. Blair really drilled down and looked at, Ms. Rye, was in 15-minute increments, starting at 5:30 in the morning. I don't want to pull that up. It kind of looks like this. It's a deployment schedule, so it shows you when our max times are. And so in the suggestion that it would go elementary A, elementary B, high school, and then middle school, it's somewhere in the realm of 3:30. We would have a need for between 497 buses and 604 buses in that particular time frame. And
So that's rocket science.
You don't have to go any further on that, okay? Ms. Hughes, and I'm gonna cut questions after Ms. Hughes so that we can have a little bit of a break, okay?
I'm just
We
noticing.
can come back to this if you all prefer later on.
I'm just noticing on each option, it shows who is impacted, whether it's tutoring, athletics, governor's school. Can we know how many students will be negatively impacted with each change as well? You might, I'm sure you don't know it off the top of your head, but I know you a second.
well, I think that one of the reasons that we enumerated both the strengths and the challenges is in our initial review, we feel like these are things that are going to need to be considered. Once we're able to drill down to a specific option, then we will work to eliminate the challenges to the best of our ability. So meaning that it would be difficult to project, I guess on each day it might change in terms of a particular load or a particular need. And so we would work over the course of that year to ensure that we have reduced the number of challenges and impacts so that services could remain as steady as possible.
We feel that once we begin at ground floor level and build our whole transportation and instructional system back up to where it is, where we want it to be, there's probably a lot of economies of scale that we're just not seeing right now because we did the deployment schedule based on our best projections of where they would be and where they need to be. So some of these challenges that we have may be solved just in that process if we build it from the ground up. which is a good thing for us, but it allow us to put a lot of effort and a lot of time and make it right.
But there's a way to know what is the worst case scenario for each option.
That's where a lot of these challenges and the pros and cons came from, is what the worst case scenario. And our deployment schedules gave us that. We know that, if we know we gotta have 600 buses at one of the 15-minute intervals, that's where you gotta start and then work backwards. So therefore, you try to mitigate that by moving times a little bit or tweaking times a little bit for other programs. Our challenges here are not the to and from school transportation. And see, that's where Chesapeake and Norfolk have so much of an advantage over us. They don't have all the embedded programs
Yeah.
we do.
Right,
But every time we move a regular school time change for a program, it impacts 14 or 15 other embedded programs. And that's what.
No, I get all that, that's
Right.
why I'm asking.
So I
What
think
is
it
the
would be
ballpark for the worst case scenario for each option?
We could take a look at that as we start to build out the presentation for May. I'm not sure I can pledge to you that I can tell you 12 students are going to be impacted in this particular place on this particular day. We can try to ballpark it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Right, we're gonna take a break here and reconvene on the dais at 6 o'clock.
Just for planning purposes, are we coming back on this? So,
Do we have more
we're obviously
questions?
available to continue to answer questions after this.
Of course, if you have any more questions, you can always email Mr. Keever and Mr. Pace on this. I'm sure they'd be happy to research or give you answers. And if you do get questions, please email when you respond the entire board back.
We will. Yep.
Thank you.